I never thought my world could shatter in just one moment, until I saw my stepson's hand linger on my back longer than it should have. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake. But the way he looked at me afterward, I knew something had shifted. My body froze, but my heart raced. I had no idea that day would change my life forever. I always thought my life was picture perfect, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. My husband, David, and I had been married for over a decade. We had a beautiful home, steady jobs, and a seemingly unshakable bond. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming, cracks I tried so hard to ignore. David was always busy, working late, traveling for business, and rarely making time for me. At first, I convinced myself that he was doing it for us, for our future. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the loneliness started to settle in like an unwanted guest. Conversations grew shorter. The passion faded. And before I knew it, I felt invisible in my own marriage. The one person who seemed to notice me, to truly see me, was my stepson, Ryan. He was kind, attentive, and always made an effort to spend time with me. At first, it felt innocent, bonding over shared interests, helping each other around the house, and even taking walks together when David was away. But over time, I began to notice how Ryan looked at me, how his eyes lingered just a little too long, and how his compliments became more personal. I told myself it was harmless. After all, I was the only maternal figure Ryan had since his own mother had passed away years earlier. I thought I was just filling a void for him, offering comfort and stability. But the day we went to the beach, everything changed. It was supposed to be a relaxing day, just the two of us enjoying the sun while David was out of town. I asked Ryan to help me put sunscreen on my back. It started as an innocent gesture, but the moment his hands touched me, something shifted. I tried to brush it off, to pretend it was nothing more than a fleeting thought. But deep down I knew I felt it. A line had been crossed, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. And from that moment on, the world I thought I knew began to crumble around me. The days following that moment on the beach felt like a blur. I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, that I was overthinking what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the way Ryan's hands lingered on my skin, or the way my body reacted to his touch. At dinner that evening, I sat across from Ryan, trying to act normal. David was still away, leaving us alone in the house. Ryan was casual, smiling and chatting like nothing had happened, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind. Every time he looked at me, my pulse quickened, and I hated myself for it. The tension only grew as the days passed. Ryan started finding reasons to be closer to me, offering to help with chores, sitting next to me on the couch, brushing against me as we passed each other in the hallway. At first, I thought it was accidental. But as it kept happening, I couldn't ignore the pattern. One evening, while I was folding laundry, Ryan walked in and leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "You've seemed distracted lately," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just tired," I replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Are you sure?" He stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Because I feel like something's changed." I didn't know how to respond. The words caught in my throat. I wanted to push him away, to draw a boundary, but instead, I just stood there frozen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every touch, every glance. Was I imagining it? Or was Ryan doing this on purpose? And if he was, why wasn't I stopping him? The tension reached its peak a few days later when we decided to watch a movie together. Ryan sat beside me on the couch, closer than usual. Halfway through the movie, his hand brushed against mine and lingered. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I felt my breath catch, and I turned to look at him. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, everything changed. There was no mistaking what was happening. The unspoken tension had finally come to the surface, and neither of us moved to stop it. But as the credits rolled and the room grew silent, guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. I excused myself and went to my room, shutting the door behind me. I needed space, time to think. But no matter how hard I tried to make sense of it, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had already crossed a line I could never uncross. The days that followed were filled with stolen glances, lingering touches, and moments of silence that spoke louder than words. I knew I had to put an end to it, to stop whatever was happening before it went too far. But a part of me didn't want to stop. A part of me felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And that terrified me more than anything else. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that whatever I was feeling toward Ryan would pass if I ignored it long enough. But no matter how hard I tried to push those thoughts away, they came rushing back the moment he was near. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything escalated. David was away on another business trip, leaving Ryan and me alone in the house again. I had spent the morning cleaning, trying to keep myself busy, but the tension hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ryan found me in the living room, wiping down the coffee table. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, but my voice betrayed me. He stepped closer, closing the space between us. "Yes, you do." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt my breath hitch as his hand brushed against mine. Gentle, deliberate, and far too intimate. "Ryan, we can't," I started, but he cut me off. "Why not?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You can feel it too, can't you?" I should have said no. I should have pushed him away and put an end to whatever this was before it went any further. But instead, I stood there frozen, as he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I hated how much I wanted more. "I think about you all the time," he admitted, his eyes searching mine. "I can't help it." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes as guilt and desire collided inside me. "This is wrong," I whispered, but even as I said the words, I didn't step away. And then it happened. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine, soft and hesitant at first, but then deeper, more urgent. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. Instead, I let myself get lost in the moment, in the feeling of being wanted, needed. When we finally pulled apart, reality came crashing down around me. "We can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "But we already have," he replied. For the rest of the day, I tried to act like nothing had happened, but the damage was done. The boundary between us had been crossed, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and secret touches. Every time we were alone, the tension grew stronger, pulling us deeper into something we both knew we couldn't control. One night, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Ryan reached for my hand. "I don't regret it," he said softly. I looked at him, tears welling in my eyes. "You should." "But I don't," he insisted. "And I don't think you do either." I didn't answer because deep down I knew he was right. As much as I hated myself for it, I didn't regret it. Not the kiss, not the touches, not the way he made me feel alive again. But the guilt was suffocating. I couldn't look David in the eye without feeling like I was betraying him all over again. I avoided his calls, made excuses for why I couldn't talk, and buried myself in household chores just to keep my mind occupied. Still, Ryan found ways to break through my defenses. Late-night conversations, accidental brushes of his hand against mine, and lingering looks that made my heart race. And with every passing day, the line between right and wrong grew blurrier. One evening, as we sat together in the dim glow of the living room, he reached for me again. This time there was no hesitation, no moment of doubt. I let him pull me closer, let his lips find mine, and gave in to everything I had been trying so hard to resist. But as the night wore on and reality began to sink in, I knew we couldn't keep pretending that this was okay. Something had to give. I just didn't know how to stop. The weight of guilt was crushing, but it wasn't enough to stop me. The stolen moments with Ryan had become an escape, a dangerous addiction that I couldn't resist, no matter how hard I tried. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The breaking point came one evening when David returned home early from his trip. I hadn't expected him, and the moment I saw him standing in the doorway, suitcase in hand and a tired smile on his face, my stomach dropped. "Surprise," he said, stepping inside. "I thought I'd come back early and spend some time with you too." I forced a smile, but my hands trembled as I reached for his suitcase. Ryan appeared in the hallway behind me, his face pale. He locked eyes with me for just a second before looking away, and in that moment, I knew David saw it. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel the tension building. Dinner that night was unbearable. David kept glancing between me and Ryan, his eyes dark with suspicion. Ryan barely touched his food, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears with every second that passed. After dinner, David pulled me aside. "What's going on?" he demanded. I froze. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Claire." His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Something's off. I see the way he looks at you. And I see the way you look at him." My heart sank. "You're imagining things," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew he didn't believe me. "I know you," David said, his voice trembling. "And I know when something isn't right." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You're paranoid, I snapped, trying to push past him. But he grabbed my arm, stopping me. Tell me the truth, he demanded. I couldn't. I couldn't bear to say the words out loud, to admit what I had done. So instead, I pulled away and ran upstairs, leaving him standing there in the kitchen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if he knew, if he would confront Ryan, if he would leave me. And when I heard footsteps outside my door, my breath caught in my throat. It was Ryan. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. Are you okay? He whispered. No, I admitted, my voice barely audible. David knows. Ryan's expression darkened. What do you mean he knows? He suspects something. My voice cracked. I don't know what to do. He moved closer, reaching out to take my hand, but I pulled away. This has to stop, I said, my voice shaking. We can't keep doing this. But I love you, he said, the words hitting me like a punch to the stomach. I shook my head. You don't mean that. I do, he insisted, stepping closer. And I think you love me too. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the look in his eyes stopped me. And in that moment, the door burst open. David stood there, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. What the hell is this? He demanded. Ryan stepped back, his hands raised defensively. It's not what it looks like, he said, but David wasn't listening. You think I'm stupid? David roared. I knew something was going on, but I never thought you'd stoop this low, Claire. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to explain, but he didn't want to hear it. Get out, he snapped, pointing at Ryan. Ryan hesitated, looking at me for a sign, but I couldn't give him one. I couldn't protect him, not anymore. Go! David shouted, and Ryan finally turned and left, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. David didn't say another word. He just walked away, leaving me alone with the wreckage of everything I had destroyed. The days that followed were a blur. David barely spoke to me, and Ryan refused to answer my calls. I felt like a ghost, haunting the house we had once called home. But the worst part was knowing that I had no one to blame but myself. I had let it happen. I had crossed the line. And now there was no going back. The house felt empty, even though David was still there. He avoided me, only speaking when absolutely necessary, and the silence between us was suffocating. Every glance he threw my way carried a mix of anger, disappointment, and heartbreak. Ryan was gone. He didn't return home after that night, and the absence of his presence was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I wanted to reach out to him, to explain, to fix things, but I knew it was too late. Everything was broken. David started sleeping in the guest room. The bed we once shared felt colder, bigger, a reminder of the distance that now separated us. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't let me. What's there to say, Claire? He said one night, his voice sharp and hollow. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. His words cut deep, but I had no defense. He was right. I spent my days wandering through the house, replaying every moment in my head, how it started, how it spiraled, and how I let it happen. The guilt was unbearable, but even worse was the emptiness. Ryan's absence haunted me. I kept expecting to hear his voice, to feel his presence, but it never came. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a text, a call, anything, but there was nothing. One night, I finally broke down and called him. My hands trembled as I held the phone to my ear, praying he'd pick up. Hello. His voice was soft but guarded. Ryan, I choked on his name, tears already streaming down my face. Why are you calling me? He asked, his tone colder than I'd ever heard it. I needed to hear your voice, I admitted. You can't do this, he said. You made your choice. His words stung, but I couldn't let go. I didn't choose this, I whispered. It just happened. And now it's over, he said, his voice final. We can't go back. The line went dead, and with it, any hope I had of salvaging what we'd had. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of what I'd done began to suffocate me. David's coldness only grew, and eventually, he confronted me again. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I tried, Claire. I really did. But I can't look at you without seeing it. I begged him to stay, to give us another chance, but his mind was made up. You need help, he said before walking out the door. And just like that, my world fell apart. I didn't leave the house for days. I couldn't face the judgment, the whispers, the stares. I cut myself off from everyone, friends, family, even the outside world. But the worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the shame. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done, about how I'd destroyed everything I loved. The guilt was like a weight I couldn't lift, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I had to face what I'd done to own it. I started therapy, hoping to make sense of the chaos inside me. It wasn't easy, talking about what happened, reliving it over and over again, but it was the only way I could start to heal. David filed for divorce shortly after. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt more than I expected. Watching him walk away felt like losing a part of myself. Ryan never came back. I heard he moved out of town, started a new life, and left everything behind, including me. And maybe that was for the best. The fallout was devastating, but it forced me to confront the truth. I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and there was no undoing it. But I couldn't let it define me. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life, piece by painful piece. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But every day, I remind myself that I can't change the past. I can only learn from it. In the aftermath of everything, I found myself staring at the pieces of my life, wondering how I had let it all fall apart. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. But this time, it wasn't just loneliness, it was regret. David had moved out, leaving behind nothing but memories and empty spaces. I packed up his things slowly, each item a painful reminder of the life we'd built and the love I had thrown away. There were moments I wanted to call him, to beg for another chance, but I knew it was too late. As for Ryan, he vanished completely. No calls. No messages. It was like he had erased me from his life, and maybe that's exactly what he needed to do. I couldn't blame him. In the end, what we had wasn't love. It was desperation, a toxic mix of longing and loneliness that left us both shattered. I spent months replaying every moment, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Was it the distance between David and me? The lack of attention, the growing void? Or was it something deeper? A flaw inside me that I couldn't fix? Therapy became my lifeline. At first, it was hard, opening up, admitting to a stranger the things I'd done, the things I'd felt. But it was also freeing. For the first time, I faced the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I learned that what I had mistaken for love with Ryan was really just a cry for help, a desperate attempt to feel wanted, seen, and alive again. I was drowning in loneliness, and he was the lifeline I grabbed, even though it was wrong. And while I hated myself for what I'd done, I also realized that I wasn't alone. Affairs don't happen in isolation. They're symptoms of deeper problems, cracks in relationships that go unnoticed until it's too late. That realization didn't excuse what I'd done, but it helped me understand it. And with understanding came healing. I started rebuilding my life, one day at a time. I focused on myself, rediscovering who I was outside of being a wife, a stepmother, and someone's second choice. I found hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and, most importantly, forgave myself. Forgiveness didn't come easy, though. The guilt lingered, always threatening to pull me back down. But I kept reminding myself that mistakes don't define us. What we do after them does. I also learned the importance of boundaries, of speaking up when something feels wrong instead of letting it fester. If I had been honest with David about how I felt, how lonely and invisible I had become, maybe things would have been different. But in the end, no amount of what-ifs could change the past. All I could do was make sure I never made the same mistakes again. David moved on eventually. I heard through mutual friends that he met someone new, a woman who made him happy. And while it hurt to know I had lost him forever, I also felt relief. He deserved happiness, and I hoped he found it. As for Ryan, I never heard from him again. Sometimes I wonder where he is, if he ever thinks about me, if he's forgiven me. But I know now that letting go was the best thing for both of us. Looking back, I see it all clearly now. The red flags I ignored, the warnings I brushed aside. And while I can't undo the damage I caused, I can make sure it never happens again. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that love isn't just about passion or desire. It's about trust, respect, and communication. Without those things, it's easy to lose yourself and the people who matter most. If you were in Claire's position, what would you have done? Could you have stopped things before they went too far, or would you have been caught in the same web of temptation and regret? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Stay tuned, there's more to come.